next speech will be held in English. I have prepared my cards in German, so I try to translate this now. Our next guest will show us 3 ways how we can get the attention from the customers back. Does that sound good? I think so. So please welcome Peter Wallace from GumGum. We are very excited to have you here.
That was a very dramatic opening video, wasn't it? Didn't expect that. That was cool. It's like being in a movie. Hello, everybody. Apologies for my lack of German. I feel very, very guilty all the time that I've been here. But there's nothing I can do about it, I'm afraid. Look, what I want to do today is take you guys through a few things. So hopefully give you a little bit of insight about what GumGum is and what we do, particularly around the cookieless world and the contextual space. And then I want to deep dive into some areas around measurement, some areas around what we need to be planning and thinking towards in the future. And hopefully you guys will take a little bit away from this, particularly around this idea of attention. The space around attention measurement is an area which is growing of huge importance across the globe. And I think it's something that we need to really have front of mind as an industry. And we need to look at how we bring it forward as a key part of what we look at with regards to measurement. So, as I mentioned, first up, just going to give you a little bit of background on who GumGum are, because conscious that maybe all of you are not necessarily familiar with who we are just yet. We recently entered the German market through the acquisition of Just Premium. So we have acquired an amazing team from over there. I see some of them around here. Thank you, guys. But look, what GumGum is at its heart is a contextual intelligence platform. So we are working to understand the meaning and the sentiment behind content. And when I say content, I mean text, I mean imagery, I mean video content, I mean audio content. Literally any type of content we are trying to understand and take a human level understanding of what that content is talking about. Now, what you can see here in this little schematic is a viewpoint on how we scan and analyze a page. So we are looking at keywords, we're looking at sentiment of that text. Is it positive? Is it neutral? Is it negative sentiment? We're looking at the imagery. So we're using computer vision technology to understand on a pixel by pixel basis what actually is contained within that image. And if you think about the way that we consume content these days, you need to have that full level of understanding to be able to take a true contextual understanding of a page. So we combine that contextual element with creativity and also attention-based measurement. There we go. So this is our vision as a business, that we plan that contextual will be the prominent targeting solution for every single media channel. Now, if you think about this idea of contextual, so targeting content based on what that article is talking about, it has always been present in some way, shape, or form. If you think about linear TV, you pick your ad slot, you pick what sort of content you want to be around. If you think about press planning, if I'm going to be selling football tickets, I want to be in and around the sports content. If I'm selling if I'm selling clothes, I want to be in and around fashion content. This idea of contextual has always been there. And it's always successful because actually you're reaching somebody in a mindset when they're really thinking about the message that you're pushing to them. Now, as I say, our vision as a business is this idea of Verity everywhere. So Verity is our contextual intelligence platform. And we believe that in a privacy-forward world, that contextual targeting and Verity, as I say, should be the prominent targeting solution of choice. So if you think about sort of emerging platforms, so in-game, if you think about the metaverse, if you think about, I don't know, somebody who's on their Peloton and maybe we're starting to deliver ads on Pelotons, we can take contextual signals from those experiences that those users are going through, and we can start to target them accordingly. And that's why we think that contextual is going to be everywhere that we sort of start thinking about. There's some digital out of home guys here today, and actually we can start thinking about contextual signals for digital out of home. Like, again, it could be everywhere. So hopefully this is kind of interesting because this stems into how Verity operates, But this also forms the basis for how the artificial intelligence space or the deep learning space really operates. So I just wanted to give you guys a bit of an understanding of how we teach our technology to see and understand the world like a human. So if anybody's familiar with artificial intelligence and the way that it operates, you'll know that machines typically cannot go out and learn on their own. Actually, a lot of the way that this operates is through what word am I looking for? Sort of assisted learning. So what we need to do is, you at the very beginning of a learning phase, you have a neural network, a brain, which doesn't really have any information in it. It's like having a child. And what you need to do is start filling up that neural network with detail about how they understand and interpret the world. So we need to start teaching this machinery to see and read content. So the way that we do this is we start to upload masses and masses of imagery, masses and masses of text, and we have that tagged. So if I'm looking at a picture of a car, I will tag that as a car, and I will upload that into my neural network, and my neural network will start to understand actually the different elements that constitute a car. So over a period of time, you are training that machine to go out and identify a car on its own accord, because actually we fed it so much data that it becomes extremely accurate. And then what we can do is we put Verity in action, and all of a sudden it can go out into the world. It can start understanding the context. It can start reading the text like a human. It can read the imagery like a human. It can start to think about video content like a human. Again, with a high degree of accuracy, because we have verified and validated that through our human interaction and that human engagement. I'd usually ask if there's any questions, but I'll wait till the end, because I know that can be a little bit confusing in terms of how neural networks operate. But again, this really does form the backbone for the way that all artificial intelligence and deep learning products typically operate. There we go. So in terms of Verity and in terms of contextual is a space, and I'm sure you guys are seeing, is growing at a rapid pace at the moment. And as I've mentioned, contextual has always been there. It just so happens that this move towards a cookieless future, this idea of sort of a privacy first world, means that a lot of people are starting to talk about contextual. Now, I think it's very, very important to understand that not all contextual is created equally. Now, the level of analysis and understanding that I've talked about with regards to Verity and the machine learning processes that we go through, they are not replicated by every single contextual solution. And contextual solutions, when I certainly first joined the industry, they would look for individual keywords to take an understanding of the content on that page. Now, I think we can all appreciate that a single keyword does not define a piece of content. So we need to start thinking about categories. We need to start thinking about the technology that is scanning and analyzing that content to be able to be secure that you are targeting the type of content that you want to be in and around. Now, what I've got here is a few examples of things that I think you should be looking to when you start thinking about contextual solutions. So on the left-hand side, this is sort of, a why we're different, but it's also the things that you need to be looking out for when you start thinking about contextual. So are they doing keyword or text-based analysis, or are they just doing domain-level analysis? A domain-level analysis does not define content. Do they look at images? Do they look at video? Do they look at audio, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You need that breadth of understanding and content analysis to be able to, again, give you that security that you're targeting the right content. Now, with the amount of new contextual solutions that are coming into market, it's very important to understand the accuracy of one contextual solution versus another. So what we have here in the middle is a representation of a piece of research that we did in partnership with Dentsu. Now, what we did is we gave a human panel 100 URLs, and we asked them to classify those 100 URLs, give us a categorization of those 100 URLs. And we looked at then the way that Verity would analyze those URLs versus 3 other contextual vendors. Obviously, what we were looking for was for the technology to agree with what the human panel was saying. And what we found from this is that Verity was in fact 69% more accurate than other contextual vendors. And again, this goes back to this idea of having that content level analysis in order to be able to take a very, very accurate understanding of the content. Now, the other step within this is that we're talking about contextual as a solution that replaces or hopefully betters what behavioral targeting is always offered. Now, within this study with Dentsu, we looked at the representation and the results that contextual gave versus behavioral. And what we found is that, number one, it was more cost efficient. Through contextual, you have a scalable solution. You're not reliant on cookie matching, which is only going to get harder and harder and harder. So actually having that bigger pool of inventory means that you are more effective in the way that you're able to bid and purchase media. So 41% lower cost per viewable impression. We're getting better performance, lower cost per click. We're getting more engagement. We're getting more attention. Contextual works better than other targeting solutions, and we've proven this time and time again. I won't go too much into the business models, but look, GumGum as a business, we offer this in and around video. We offer it in and around sort of a coupled up creative solution and various different ways for you to activate across Verity. You can talk to me about this afterwards or some of the other lovely people from the business. But look, this is what I really wanted to get into. And one of the core pillars that GumGum talks around is this idea of attention-based measurement. So when I joined the digital industry many, many years ago, I would buy a homepage takeover and I'd go, what was the click-through rate? Oh, this is amazing. I can understand how many impressions I've delivered. I can understand sort of, who's engaged with it. And this was the big story and the big point of growth around digital. Everybody's like, this is amazing. We can finally measure things. It isn't like running a press ad, which at that point, it was very difficult to understand and validate the value of press. But because all of a sudden we were having a CTR metric, everybody's like, wow, this is incredible. But that mentality hasn't shifted. So actually, we're still sat here as an industry measuring things in the same way that we measured it many years ago, as I said, about 16, 17 years ago, I guess, when I joined the digital industry. And actually, there should be a realization and sort of I'm sure you guys can think who here has clicked on an ad recently? Who has clicked on an ad because they wanted to click on an ad versus it was something on a mobile phone and you're trying to scroll down the page and you're like, oh, crap, actually, I didn't want to do that. Actually, the 1% click-through rate does not represent performance. We need to start thinking a lot more sort of in detail and using data and analytics available to us to start understanding and optimizing better towards metrics. So there's a day within the UK. My marketing team tried to remove this slide, I will just add, but I've managed to slip it in here. There's a day run by the IAB in the UK, which is called Anti-Click-Through Rate Day, and their tagline is "Don't be a clickhead." And what they're encouraging people to do is remove CTR from every single media plan or every single report. It is not a metric of success. People do not intentionally, particularly often, click on ads. My mum, my 73-year-old mother, she might click on an ad because actually she thinks she's been followed around and she's wondering what's going on. But the majority of us do not want to be pulled away from the content that we're engaging with. So why are we deeming success to be around something like a vanity metric such as click-throughs? So this to me leads to a point where there needs to be a huge shift in the way that we measure and understand media. So what we've got here on the left are what I would perceive to be the things that we are typically tasked towards today for KPIs and success of a campaign. So brand safety. Of course, I totally buy into the fact that we should deliver your media within a brand safe environment. It should not be a KPI. Your KPI should be around success and performance. You should demand brand safety from every single partner that you work with. If they can't deliver it to you, why would you work with somebody who can't deliver you brand safe content? Viewability. Of course, your ad should be in view as much as possible. If it's below the fold and it is never seen by a user, how are we attributing any value to this? And arguably, this harks back to this sort of bygone era of measuring things based on last impression. Because it was below the fold, I never saw it, but actually you're attributing a sale to me. It doesn't make sense. So yes, viewability, brand safety, I 100% buy into, but these should be hygiene metrics. They're both things that you demand from partners. You do not put them as metrics of success. Then on the bottom there, we have click-through rate and we have engagement. So as I said earlier, if I give you a 1% click-through rate, you're probably going to turn around to me and say, it was great. Really enjoyed that. But what is the value of the other 99% of media that was delivered? Because I gave you 1% click-through rate, is that the only bit that is classed as successful? You may as well buy on a CPC if you're going to measure things on click-through rate, otherwise what are you spending that other 99% of your media spend on? And then the other one is engagement. There's various different sort of routes and thoughts around what engagement is. But again, you're giving a very sort of limited view of performance on a campaign. And this to me is why we sort of shift towards this idea of attention-based measurement. And in my opinion, sort of this idea of attention can become a measurement channel that can cross every single media channel. And all of a sudden, we have an interconnecting way of measuring media that you can start to compare very easily, digital to out-of-home to linear TV to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can start to optimize based on this. And this, to me, looking at the amount of time eyeballs are actually on your ad is a much more key indicator of success than something like a CTR. Now, what I want to do is sort of go into a little bit more detail about how this idea of attention operates. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the methodologies that are potentially available, and then talk a little bit about sort of some of the studies that we've done around the attention space and how that sort of then starts to play into digital media. So for me, these are a variety of things that we can start to look at with regards to understanding attention. So if there's lots and lots of material that sits around the sort of attention economy and how that impacts on media. I would actually recommend a book by a lady called Karen Nelson Field, who talks about the attention economy and how media works. It's kind of steeped in academia, but it's very, very interesting and sort of really talks about this space. But again, these things are very, very easy for us to understand on every single campaign. So time in view. If an ad is in view for a longer period of time, it is likely to drive more attention. Page real estate. Who remembers the last IAB ad that they saw? Who remembers the last 300 by 250, 728 by 90, et cetera, et cetera? Like, you don't pay attention to smaller ads because they are not creative. They're not capturing your imagination. They're not capturing your eye. So this idea of page real estate and being standout makes a lot of difference to attention. Then there's other things that we can talk about, like brand scores and other metrics that people like Moat and IAS will be able to get through. But then we also have a deeper level understanding of attention that we can start to look at. So how many people actually viewed your ad? So physically, out of the 100% of media that was delivered, what percentage had eyeballs on that ad? Now, that becomes a very, very powerful metric to start looking at. And I'll talk about a study that we've done with eye tracking studies that starts to validate this some more. Average dwell time. So, eyeballs fell on that ad, but how long did they fall on that ad for? There are many, many studies that suggest that you need a minimum of 3 seconds of attention on an ad for that attention to be meaningful. So again, another amazing metric. And then the last thing we can start talking about is actually how much attention was given to your ads for every 1,000 impressions. And all of a sudden you have this new metric that you can start planning towards, optimizing towards. And we know and we can prove that increased levels of attention means increased levels of business outcomes for that advertiser. When I say business outcomes, I'm talking about like tangible business outcomes. We're not just talking about sort of somebody paid more attention to it. Great. Like there is an end goal where we talk about purchase intent, where we talk about actual purchase. Like there is long-term value to greater levels of attention. So as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about a study that we had conducted ourselves. So this was in partnership with Publicis Group. And we partnered with a business called Lumen Research, who are a business who specialize in this idea of attention-based measurement. So the way that they do this is they have an opted-in panel, and they expose that panel to different ad units over the course of their browsing history. And they use eye tracking studies. So, using their webcam on their laptop or on their mobile device to understand how the eyeballs are falling on the page. Physically, how much attention is being paid to the content versus the ad unit versus whatever else it might be. And all of a sudden, through a pretty sizable panel and a lot of data, they have an extremely accurate view on what formats, what type of content, what type of context drives greater levels of attention from users. So what we did, as I said, in partnership with Publicis, is we got 4 different advertisers from 4 distinct different industry categories, and we delivered a combination of ads from those advertisers. So some were standard IAB units, so they're smaller ads that I talked about, and some were much more high-impact digital units. And then applying that eye tracking methodology, we then looked across sort of both contextually relevant and non-contextually relevant ads or environments, how much attention was given to those different ad units. And the results from this, I think, again, sort of talks to this idea of how attention can be really important, but it also talks about the importance of delivering engaging formats and the importance of how combining creativity and targeting can really drive better performance. So these are just the first results in terms of when we delivered a high impact digital ad within a non-contextually relevant environment, how much attention did it drive? So first of all, 92% of people that were exposed to a high impact ad actually put their eyeballs on that ad. There was an average 4.4 seconds of viewing time. So we're well above that 3-second average. Now, when we compared that to the standard IAB formats, you're getting circa around 1.2 seconds of attention. So number one, you're nowhere near that 3-second rule. And you are very, very much lower than any high impact digital ads. And then we're also seeing a really high impact around recall. So actually, because people are paying attention to it, they're paying attention to that ad for upwards of 4 seconds. There is greater levels of recall as a result. And we all know that recall equals more purchase intent that then shifts more units at the end. And overall, what we're seeing is that there's 75 minutes of attention for every 1,000 impressions. Now, that is 22 times more the desktop norm. So, number one, awesome metrics that we can start to understand that gives us that full understanding and appreciation of the 100% of media. But number two, this is giving a realization that, when you're delivering smaller non-creative ad units, you are not driving attention. You're not making any meaningful impact. What you're really doing with those smaller ad units is that you're trying to drive back to those vanity metrics or those metrics that don't really drive change that we talked about in the very beginning. Now, the second part of the study, as I mentioned, is what is the impact of contextual? So if I deliver my rich media, high impact digital ad within a contextually relevant environment, what does that then do to the attention levels? What does that do to the outcome of the campaign that we deliver? Now, the interesting thing in this is that in terms of attention, it actually doesn't make very much difference to the levels of attention that are given to an ad unit, whether you deliver it in a contextually or a non-contextually relevant environment. There was a marginal change, a marginal increase, but not significant. Where we really saw a significant shift was in this idea of product recall. So spontaneous recall, so where you're listing out sort of the brands that they might have been exposed to. There's a 41% increase on a contextually relevant ad versus non-contextually relevant. There is a 69% increase in prompted recall. So what you're therefore left with here is a job of the creativity, and you've got a job to do with the data. So creative is there to drive the eyeballs to that ad unit, to drive it to the message. But what we see here is that if you're not relevant to that user, you get lower levels of recall because, of course, that product and that message is not front of mind for them at that very given moment in time. So the idea of the data is therefore to derive relevance to that user and make sure that we are meaningful based on their mindset at that moment. Now, the way that I've sort of gone about rationalizing this for myself is it's a bit of a strange association, but what I'm doing here is I think that advertising is therefore like online dating. Now, fortunately, because I'm not sure I could deal with this, I have never been on Tinder, but as I understand from people that I know, maybe I've got terrible friends, but not many of them click within the profiles and read all the data and the information about the people that they're swiping across. They make a very quick assumption of whether they're swiping left or right within the dating app. This is like the creativity, right? If you don't have something that stands out to that user that attracts their attention, they are swiping left on you very quickly and they are not putting their eyeballs on you. But then what happens is, if you swipe right and there's a match and there's, mutual appreciation of your photos, that's when you start to understand, you start to look at the content and actually who that person is. That's when you start to understand whether there is a meaningful connection between you and that person within that dating app. And that meaningful connection then becomes around the message that you're delivering that user. So we drive and we deliver something through beautiful standout creative. But then what I do is I make sure that I'm meaningful by ensuring that I am relevant and making sure that, what that user is interested in and what they're thinking about, I am there to deliver them that message. So therefore, for me, this is what advertising is about, and this is what we need to focus on. And this is how you're going to drive better outcomes for your campaigns. Now, just as a very last piece for me, what's next for the attention space? So I have no doubt that everybody here is going to see more and more uplift and more talk around attention. At the moment, there is no standardization for attention. There is no IAB sort of criteria for what defines attention. There are various different technologies that drive the attention space, but there is no single outlook on what defines attention. We as an industry need to start defining this and understanding how we measure it and how we understand it. And only then can we really start to apply it to every single portion of our business. Once I think we've got that nailed down, what you guys will start to see is that we'll start to talk about real-time optimizations. So rather than optimizing towards something, limited like a click-through rate, you are going to be optimizing in real time towards attention-based metrics. What is the messaging? What is the creative? What's the format? What's the environment that's most applicable to drive better levels of attention? We have the capabilities of doing that, and we will continue to do that. And then, as I said, attention measurement is going to be the connecting piece between all media channels. You will start to look at your cost per attention within the digital environment. You'll compare it to mobile. You compare it to social. You'll compare it to linear TV, et cetera, et cetera. Like, this will be the connecting data point for everybody to start understanding and optimizing and start planning towards success for their campaigns. Because again, this can be a currency that sits everywhere across all of the media channels. So for me, it's really, really exciting. Loads of stuff to do, and something that I think should be front of mind for everybody in the room. That is me.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Any questions from the audience? There is. Do we have a microphone?
Hiya. First of all, thanks a lot for the presentation. It was actually really great to see this kind of on stage, and I hope we see more of it over kind of future events as well. I think in terms of adoption of this, I think you nailed it on the head, that because there's no standardized usage of viewability, let's just take viewability as one, like Facebook has viewability, but then Google has its own version of viewability. That's like a really big problem when you're then kind of passing it up the food chain. So what I'm seeing a lot, I work in the telco industry, and it's pretty hard to shift consideration for buying a new service plan. Like, it's just really difficult to do that. So they want to double down on awareness, but it's not an easy task. So my question is a little bit, first of all, have you got any really good examples of advertisers doing contextual-based advertising? So let's just take a use case example. Imagine I broke my phone, or the screen's cracked. So I go to a second-hand seller to look for a new phone, and I become like an advert. I get an advert of like, got a cracked screen, just as an example. Have you got some good examples? That would be first question. And second question is, have you seen any particular advertisers that are actually seriously taking in like viewability into, say, their attribution model or their media mix modeling?
Blimey. So in terms of examples, yes. I mean, we've worked with, Vodafone's probably one of the good examples that we've worked with for a heck of a long time. And look, sort of, first of all, the one thing I'd say around contextual is there's sort of, there's a not misconception, but I think there's a misuse of contextual in many ways, where people believe there's a one-to-one relationship with how contextual should work. So an auto advertiser shouldn't just deliver within an automotive environment. Actually, when we're talking about top of funnel and we're talking about awareness, like actually what are the different environments that we want to influence, or what are the different elements of a car that we want to push that drive change or perception, or like better perception in that user? If it's 4x4, is it around safety, and therefore we're going around parenting content, you're keeping your family safe? If we're talking about the outdoorsy or the off-roading capabilities, again, different types of context that you want to deliver yourself against. I'm not going to spout off too much around case studies, but we do have loads and loads of case studies around where we've compared different contextual environments and aligning with the content and messaging. I think there's another step for the industry where we start talking about more dynamic creative optimization around contextual. And there's some cool stuff that we can start to explore around, like, do we have 10 different contextual targeting strands and we have 100 different creative messages? So some cool stuff coming around there. Your question around viewability, the adoption of attention viewability within sort of attribution modeling, I think that every advertiser today is bought into viewability, and viewability is very important. I don't think that today every advertiser is bought into it being part of attribution, or certainly then they don't have necessarily attention as a core portion of what they're looking at. One of my frustrations today is that attention and a lot of that measurement is being driven by the sell side rather than the buy side. So actually we push the attention-based measurement as value added for campaigns. But realistically, attention should sit across every single portion of the media plan. So it should be led by the buy side rather than the sell side. And I think there needs to be a shift. And I think it'll happen. I think it's just going to take a bit of time. The whole attribution piece, there is a heck of a lot of mess coming up around there anyway. And I think that measurement and attribution is probably the biggest conversation that we need to have over the next 18 months to get ourselves in a position where we really understand success of media. Hopefully that'll answer your questions.
Thank you
just
very much.
Maybe a quick follow-up. Are the case studies on GumGum's website?
www.gumgum.com.
Cool, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I've seen there were more questions, but I guess you stay in the house.
I'll stick around.
So maybe outside the hall you can meet Peter and ask all your questions. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody.